Have you ever felt that being good hurts? In a world where cynicism triumphs, kindness almost feels like a miscalculation. Why does the world seem to punish those who try to make it better? Often they're mocked, used, even destroyed. This is a pain we've all seen, or perhaps felt ourselves. It's as if the world has a cruel mechanism for punishing those who dare to be different, who refuse to play the game of falsehood. But why do good people suffer? It's a question that echoes in the human soul across time. Why do purity, compassion, and inherent kindness so often seem to attract not happiness, but overwhelming suffering? We believe that virtue should be rewarded, that a righteous heart should be a shield against adversity. Yet reality, as portrayed by one of the greatest masters of the human soul, Fyodor Dostoevsky, is often cruel and paradoxical. Today, we'll dive into Dostoevsky's ideas through one of his most complex and disturbing works, The Idiot. We'll unravel the profound truth he left us through the enigmatic figure of Prince Lev Nikolaevich Myshkin, exploring how his goodness became both his glory and his most terrible curse. Pain is, without a doubt, an undeniable part of the human condition. Yet the suffering of those who seem to embody virtue and innocence intrigues us and, at times, enrages us. There's an inherent expectation that goodness should be rewarded, that purity of heart should serve as a kind of safeguard against life's hardships. Contrary to this fundamental expectation, reality, as masterfully depicted by Dostoevsky, often reveals itself to be brutal and indifferent to moral righteousness. Beauty is an enigma, and spiritual beauty, in its purest and most unguarded form, can be equally enigmatic and disturbing to a world that, for the most part, neither understands nor values it. The central dilemma, therefore, lies in the intrinsic incompatibility between the essentially good and altruistic nature of certain individuals and the complex, often corrupt social web in which they find themselves entangled. Society, with its utilitarian conventions, material ambitions, and deep moral imperfections, consistently proves incapable of embracing goodness devoid of malice or innocence with ulterior motives. On the contrary, it tends to interpret such purity, paradoxically, as an exploitable weakness, a laughable naivety, or, at its extreme, true idiocy. It is this profound and irreconcilable clash between the inner light of a pure soul and the outer shadows of an imperfect world that generates the most piercing suffering and ultimately tragedy for those who dare to be genuinely good. Fyodor Dostoevsky, a giant of literature, did not view writing merely as a form of entertainment, but as an existential battlefield for exploring the deepest moral, psychological, and spiritual questions of humanity. In his masterpiece, The Idiot, published in 1869, Dostoevsky undertakes a daring literary experiment, the attempt to portray a man absolutely beautiful and intrinsically good, an ideal of moral perfection, and place him at the heart of a decadent society. This man is Prince Lev Nikolaevich Myshkin. Myshkin is, in his purest essence, a beautiful soul. He is characterized by an innocence and purity that are almost childlike, demonstrating an exceptional sweetness and naivety. His righteousness and refusal to compromise truth or compassion in any circumstance lead him to act in ways that are often perceived as illogical by others. Myshkin has countless and unthinkable illogical actions which stem from a heart without malice. Yet, and this is the heart of the dilemma, his intrinsic goodness is often met with aversion, and he is repeatedly labeled an idiot. The prince himself reflects on whether his illness or his shame makes him appear an idiot. He is seen as simple-minded, and thus his purity, instead of being valued, becomes a target for exploitation and misunderstanding by those around him. Dostoevsky's profound truth about the suffering of good people in the idiot lies in the complex interplay of Prince Myshkin's goodness, his medical condition, and his inevitable collision with human nature and society. The nature of Prince Myshkin's goodness and the price of illumination. Prince Myshkin is a singular figure, a being of almost celestial goodness and purity, yet constantly confronted with the harshness and imperfection of the world. His beautiful soul and his innocence and purity are his essence, but also his greatest vulnerability. His righteousness, his inability to lie or act with ulterior motives, and his boundless compassion are traits that put him on a collision course with social conventions. He has countless and unthinkable illogical actions, but these are driven by an unwavering goodness which society perceives as a sign of being simple-minded. Central to understanding Prince Myshkin is his epilepsy, a condition that Dostoevsky describes with striking detail and which holds profound significance for his perception of the world. Before his seizures, Myshkin experiences moments of an aura, periods of immense joy, harmony, and hope, culminating in a perfect ecstasy. In these fleeting moments, his mind is illuminated, and he attains an extraordinary perception and understanding of life and reality. He describes these moments as a sensation of heightened consciousness and fullness, where all his doubts and anxieties dissolve into a gentle calm and a harmonious joy and hope. Paradoxically, it is in these moments of clarity that he feels exceptionally intelligent, though to others his illness renders him illogical. Yet this euphoria and insight is invariably followed by a great anguish and a mental darkness. Myshkin questions the validity and value of such moments if they culminate in such suffering, feeling depressed and physically incapacitated after the seizures. His illness, for Dostoevsky, is not merely a physical burden, but the very source of his unique insight, granting him a profound vision that the ordinary world cannot bear or even comprehend. He himself wonders, after an ecstasy, what value do such moments have if they culminate in such suffering? The society in which Myshkin moves is dominated by men of business and practical individuals who operate under logics of self-interest and convenience. His purity and lack of malice are seen as a weakness or an anomaly, and his disarming sincerity makes him vulnerable to exploitation and misunderstanding. His generosity is taken advantage of, and his profound words are often ignored, ridiculed, or misinterpreted. The prince is a simpleton, and his actions are often illogical to the world. He acts with a romantic idea, whimsical fantasies, and selfish caprices that do not fit into social pragmatism. Myshkin is too soft and the gentlest of living beings, and this delicate nature prevents him from transforming the cruel reality without being crushed by it himself. He feels that his true happiness lay in anticipation, not in realization. The central figures of his suffering are Nastasia Philippovna and Rogozhin, who represent the extreme and destructive passions of society. Myshkin feels deeply drawn to Nastasia Philippovna, driven by an overwhelming desire to save her from herself and her fate. He sees her agony and her suffering beauty, praying for her as a sinful woman. Yet Nastasia's opaque soul, her complexity, her self-destructive tendencies, she wished harm upon herself out of an extreme, selfish and shameless caprice. And her inability to accept redemption decisively contribute to the impending tragedy. Myshkin cannot save her, and his attempts only exacerbate his own pain. Rogozhin, his friend and rival, embodies raw, destructive passion. Their friendship, sealed with the exchange of crosses, is a profound and contradictory bond between purity and darkness. Rogozhin, driven by a pathological jealousy and an overwhelming passion for Nastasia, becomes the uncontrollable force that leads to the final catastrophe, murdering Nastasia Philippovna and thus plunging Myshkin into his own definitive madness. Myshkin recognizes that beauty is an enigma, and that his goodness is divinely logical, but it is unbearable to the world. Ultimately, Dostoevsky suggests that Myshkin's absolute goodness, though divinely logical, is unbearable to an imperfect and morally ambiguous world. His righteousness and purity, instead of being a beacon, become an anomaly that society cannot digest. Myshkin, being too soft and the gentlest of living beings, cannot navigate or transform the cruel reality without being crushed by it himself. His true happiness lay in anticipation, not in realization.
He himself reflects on whether his profound acts of goodness are not illogical to a world that does not understand them. His tragedy lies not only in his personal experiences, but in his fundamental inability to reconcile his inner purity with the corruption and complexity of the external world. Myshkin suffers because his romantic ideas, his whimsical fantasies, and his selfish caprices cannot coexist with the reality of fallen humanity. The tragedy of Prince Myshkin, as Dostoevsky unfolds it in The Idiot, is not a mere accident of fate, but a central and unsettling statement by the author. Absolute goodness, when unprotected and naive, becomes an overwhelming vulnerability in a world where corruption, malice, and human complexity reign. Dostoevsky is not criticizing goodness itself, but the society that rejects or destroys it. The prince's suffering is thus a reflection of the sickness of society itself, incapable of recognizing, embracing, or sustaining true virtue without corrupting it. Myshkin's purity is so radical that it challenges established social and moral norms, exposing their hypocrisies and deepest flaws. His suffering becomes in this way an unforgiving mirror that confronts us with our own imperfections and our inability to cope with genuine goodness. Myshkin is, for Dostoevsky, an attempt to portray a man truly sent from God, a near Christ-like figure whose compassion and unconditional love should redeem humanity. Yet the world, unprepared for such purity, represses and crushes him. His true happiness lay in anticipation, in his moments of perfect ecstasy that preceded his epileptic seizures, before the brutal collision with reality. The anguished question that echoes in his mind and in the reader's is the reward worth it? A question about the value of his suffering. For Myshkin, suffering does not redeem him, but destroys him, precisely because the world is not ready for his redemption. His epilepsy is also a symbol of this inherent fragility in his nature, placing him on a tenuous border between the divine and the human, between clairvoyance and madness. His practical understanding of the world's ways and his soul collide head-on with his good nature and the relentless reality surrounding him. Myshkin's story, therefore, invites us to a deep and disturbing introspection. Must goodness, to survive in a world so complex and hostile, possess a certain degree of cunning, self-protection, or strategic defense? Or does its purest essence lie precisely in its vulnerability and its capacity to love without reservation, regardless of the cost? The truth Dostoevsky presents is that the ability to love and forgive unconditionally, though intrinsically beautiful and divinely logical, is terribly dangerous in a world that does not share and sometimes even despises those values. His fate is to be the softest and gentlest of living beings in an environment that demands hardness and pragmatism. His life experience is a demonstration of the paradox that Myshkin himself is, being at once exceptionally intelligent and illogical. The question Dostoevsky, through the prince, poses to the reader is pressing. How can we cultivate goodness? How can we be truly beautiful souls without being crushed by a world indifferent or openly hostile to it? The answer is not simple, and the novel offers no easy solutions. On the contrary, it forces us to confront the painful reality that sometimes the greatest virtue can lead to the greatest suffering. His sincerity is seen as a weakness, and his desire to save Nastasia Philippovna or simply to be good leads him to ruin. His suffering is a testament to the difficulty, perhaps impossibility, of embodying the ideal of Christ in a fallen world. In sum, Dostoevsky, through the unspeakable suffering of Prince Myshkin, offers a profound and unsettling truth. Good people suffer not because of their own flaws or defects, but because of the world's inability to embrace, understand, and, most importantly, tolerate them. Goodness, in its purest and most unguarded form, becomes an unbearable burden and, paradoxically, a threat to the status quo of a morally ambiguous society. By exposing the imperfections, hypocrisies, and cruelties of humanity, Myshkin's purity becomes a beacon that blinds, rather than illuminates, those unprepared for the light. Prince Myshkin is the idiot who, in his simplicity and purity, becomes the unforgiving mirror of a humanity sick and lacking in empathy. His tragedy is not a story of individual failure, but a powerful social, psychological, and spiritual critique. He is too soft, the gentlest of living beings, and the world too cruel to tolerate him without corrupting or ultimately destroying him. His final collapse is a desperate cry about the unbearable weight of innocence confronted with reality. Dostoevsky's work thus invites us to an urgent existential reflection. How do we balance our aspiration for goodness with the reality of human imperfections and malice? Can we transcend our own social idiocy, our inability to see and value genuine goodness, to create a world where purity of heart is not a sentence of suffering, but a source of true redemption and harmony? The answer, Dostoevsky suggests, lies in our capacity to understand, accept, and perhaps transform ourselves. What would you do to protect your goodness, to preserve your purity in a world that often feeds on innocence? Share your reflection in the comments and share this video so that more people can unravel Dostoevsky's profound and unsettling truth.